Conistee, how are ye? Welcome to another Candlelit Tales podcast. And this is a pre-show podcast because, well, we initially thought it'd be a great idea to start a podcast talking about how we want to design stories and how we want to talk about how to tell the stories. But it morphed into a story and a post-show because we never really got organized enough to do this. So
and we actually did try this last week. We tried to do the discussion about the series before we did the series, and what happened on the podcast was, I think, the reason why we never actually did this as a structured podcast, because you and I just full on had a fight.
Yeah, we did. Yeah. And that's basically that's the great thing about Hegarty's. We're very good at fighting. And we're very good at getting over it. Get pissed off, get over it, Fuck it.
Yeah. Get pissed off. Don't talk to each other for a day and a half and then are grand again.
Savage.
I'm sure it was obviously very comfortable for Rue and Oisín to witness. So sorry about that, guys.
Hilarious for us. Don't worry about it. We definitely enjoyed it. We definitely enjoyed it. So some of your fights are more broadcastable than others. And I don't know if that one was really as digestible for the general public as some would be.
I think we just got a little frustrated with each other, and neither of us wanted anyone else to hear it, because we were like, no, I was too angry to think. So I just kept saying the same thing over and over again, but louder and swearier.
So to fill you in there, guys, essentially we had a conversation about like how we'll set up the new series, and we both came up with an idea essentially on the same phone call and went off in two different directions, and then proceeded to not really listen to each other as we both got excited about two different, similar but highly different ideas. And we've decided to separate those out and make them two different series. So we've actually done a lot of work. We've come up with two great series. One for this year, one for next year. And if you want to listen to this extremely exclusive content, this groundbreaking, revolutionary insight into our creation process and the bickering between the siblings, you can go on to patreon.com/candlelittales and subscribe to our channel. You can throw us a little bit of change, or you can be a deadly head and throw us loads of change, or whatever it is you want. And then you will get that exclusive content of that argument. Yeah, I'm not sure I could ever listen to it again, but hey,
I'm not gonna.
My guest.
But you know what? You guys can listen to it, and you can tell us what we think. We trust you, Patreon people. We trust you guys with our messiness.
With our
We've
arguments.
been through it once. We don't need it again.
No, we don't.
Yeah.
Not someone else's burn.
Yeah.
So
other people might actually get some crack out of it. I don't know. I'm too close to it. Anyway, hopefully that will entice some people.
Or steer them completely clear of ever becoming a Patreon supporter, which would be terrible, because it's been keeping us going, lads, and we've been motivated to keep on producing these podcasts because of all the Patreon support.
Absolutely.
And we've been able to afford it and putting in the time of it. So, Sorcha, do you want to fill us in on what? So this is the the introduction to the new series. And the new series, do you want to tell us about what we're going to be doing from November to December?
From November to December, and maybe even a little bit of January, because we have quite a list of people that we want to check in on, I think. Yes, so for this series, we are taking individual characters and individual stories, and we're kind of doing a zoom in on different perspectives of different characters. Now, it's been our tradition in Candlelit Tales to tell a version of the Táin in November. That's what we started doing in the Stag's Head all those years ago. We've done it pretty much every year on the podcast. Our very first episode of the podcast came out in November, and it was the Shadows of the Táin, the live performance. And we did it again, and we did it again. And I'm a little bit tawned out for the moment, although we are recording this just before we go into a week of doing Táin shows, which maybe has something to do with that. So by the time this comes out, we will have finished all of the Táin shows, I think. But I was not relishing the thought of telling the Táin even in a different way. I kind of wanted to take a break from the epic of it and just look at the people around it and the kind of personalities around it, because it's a huge story. It's an epic story, but there's also, this is one of those things that we've talked about in our various different retellings of it. Anytime you tell a story, a lot of the work in telling a story is deciding the stories that you don't tell. So we wanted to kind of look at the stories that we don't tell when we tell the Táin. So all of these characters, all of these people that in some way maybe intersect with it. Some of them you will recognize very clearly from past tellings of the Táin. Some of them will be familiar to people from previous episodes of the podcast, particularly when we were doing like the Death of the Ulster Men series. So you'll know them. You'll be able to go back and look at some of them and, refresh your memory on them. But we are telling stories of the Ulster Cycle. And there's a kind of all of these people intersect with the Táin, and there's another link that we'll talk about in a little while.
Yeah, and I guess it's important to kind of point out that the fact that like we've always been intrigued by the Ulster Cycle. We've actually gone back and over it in different angles and looking at the different ways to tell the Táin, both live performances, and we've great ideas, lads. Well, we think so. Of reshaping it and keeping it fresh. And I had a perspective of making it in a new way, a slightly different way for next year. Interestingly, once I got my head around what your concept was, it has begun to really excite me as well, because the Táin is a story that you can know and you can go back and listen to it. And you'll hear some of the names in this coming podcast that will be linked to the Táin, where we're going to try and kind of mostly leave out the narration of the Táin and keeping these episodes as standalone episodes. They're all going to be great stories. There's so much material in the Ulster Cycle. You have to take famously a winter to tell it. That's what it was. It was you started it in Samhain and you finished it in spring. There's so much there. So there's an ample amount of information and stuff, resources for us to go and research. And so that's what's kind of exciting, to try and put a few narratives together. And what we're going to try and do is stick very close to one perspective, the character that we choose. And we've written down a few characters and we've kind of took a lucky dip and which ones jump out at what people. And we're all going to tell a few stories in this upcoming podcast series. And so without further ado, we want to maybe name some of these characters, which we're going to get into. So Rue, do you want to tell us about the character, the perspective, and what you're thinking about and why you chose this character specifically for this upcoming podcast?
Sure, yeah. So the character that I'm going to tell a story about is Ferdy McDammon, Cú Chulain's best mate, who gets killed by Cú Chulainn in a very emotional high point of the Táin. And I want to have a look at him, the early days of him meeting Cú Chulainn. Him and Cú Chulainn become the best mates on the Isle of Skye in Scotland, being trained by the warrior woman Scach, who trains the greatest warriors in the world. And the two of them are like, Ferdy is Cú Chulain's only equal on the Isle of Skye. And there is some serious homoerotic undertones going on with their relationship. That's been pointed out by scholars, which is just interesting. And would be and like that aspect of things, I'll be interested in exploring. And in terms of did we say what the hook of the premise is going to be? Yeah, I can't remember.
Well,
no, my bad.
Yeah, I was gonna save it, but I think let's tell people about the battle rage, and then I'll tell them why afterwards.
Nice.
Cool. Nice. Well, there you go. The hook of the premise of this series is at the theme that's going to tie things together is battle rage. And in relation to Ferdy, I haven't directly come across anything that to say that Ferdy himself has a particular battle rage. I don't, Aaron or Surik, I don't know if he ever have with that, but I think I think that's cool, because the thing that I'm interested in going into with Ferdy is kind of his experience of Cú Chulain's battle rage, and him as being kind of a foil to that. I kind of see them as maybe being two different sides to the one coin, whereby Cú Chulainn has that propensity to lose his shit completely and have that battle rage. So Cuchulainn is like Ferdia is like water to Cuchulainn's fire, and that the two of them operate fantastically together because they have a certain symbiosis, and that Ferdia has a capacity to maybe cool down and direct Cuchulainn's focus. So that's
really interesting.
That's how I want to explore that thing.
That's great, Ru, because I've always thought that as Cuchulainn progresses as a warrior, as he gets older, you hear less about his battle rage. So the kind of inference for me has always been that he's matured. Even over in Skag's Island, he learned how to temper or kind of cool down. Temper his rage in order to be a more kind of well-rounded and more mature fighter, to try and not lose his shit and depend on it. And we've talked before about like how a trainer like Skag would have like seen the battle rage as losing control and not being good enough for the standard of her excellence, and Ferdia having that very well much ingrained in him because he was at the school for longer than Cuchulainn. He really graduated. Maybe Cuchulainn left a bit.
Well, I think it's also kind of interesting. I think this series will be an interesting way of exploring like what do we mean by battle rage? Because like Cuchulainn has a very literal battle rage in that he has a physical transformation, and like he doesn't know friend from foe, but it's referred to in other, like it's named as something that other people have, but they don't change, they don't shapeshift in their battle rage. That's a particular kind of feature of it that he seems to have. And so the idea that's I think is really interesting is like, what is that moment of loss of control? What is that moment of like seeing yourself from the outside? If it's not the same as what it is for Cuchulainn, because I think it's going to be different for different characters.
Interesting, though. There is something with Ferdia that does happen where he does have a bit of a loss of control. I don't know if it's quite the same thing, but like there's a moment of a loss of control with Ferdia in the Táin where Maeve manages to trick him into agreeing to fight Cuchulainn, but just by getting a rise out of him and saying that like, oh yeah, what he said about you must be true then, that you're a bit of a chicken shit, And in that moment he loses his shit a bit and he shoots his fucking mouth off.
Only takes a moment.
It only takes a moment, and then he's committed. So like it's in him. It's in him. Like and that might be something to explore too.
Yeah, I think that'll be a really interesting one, because the one that I think that was I think that'll be fascinating to look at in Ferdia, and I think the way that you described it for the character you're looking at, Oisín, is again different and really, really interesting. Do you want to tell everybody about Finnever?
Oh yeah. Well, because basically we weren't going to tell Finnever because she was boring, uninteresting, and didn't do anything except died, right?
That was me, by the way. That was what I said.
All right, and I was
lest anyone levy any accusations of misogyny. That was me. That was my internalized misogyny. It was mine. Saz.
I always knew you were a misogynist.
We all are. We're swimming in the water. Anyway, go on.
Thanks for claiming that, Turka. Yeah, thank you.
So, anyhow, I was like, no. Her ma was Maeve. Maeve was an absolute weapon. Literally, she's depicted as a weapon. And Finnever had absolutely no way to defeat her, and her mom manipulated and controlled her, dangled prizes in front of her, dangled her as a prize, etc., etc., etc. And my take on it was the battle rage overcame her, and she took the prize away from Maeve, so therefore she couldn't get anyone to fight for her anymore, and ultimately decimated the fucking army, but just with the only way that she could. And that my take on it was like, well, I know I'm not winning, but I'm going to hurt you as much as I can on the way out, which would definitely be my approach. Like, and it's cornered in that scenario.
Yeah,
and it's a fairly age-old story of a daughter getting back at her very powerful mother in whatever way that is possible to her.
Or not even mothers and daughters. I mean, the resonance it had for me was with Deirdre. when Deirdre is trapped and cornered, and they're like, well, we have you now, and you're like a ewe between two rams, and what are you going to do? And that's what she fucking does.
Fuck you, bitches. Bang.
There's a real tradition of like suicide as fuck you in Irish myth. That's interesting, that it's kind of like,
it wasn't seen as a no hope option. It was seen as a last ditch warrior's exit kind of thing, you know.
Which is, I think,
because ultimately, if you're one person standing there fighting against 100 people invading, that's fucking suicide. It just looks more glorious than taking a load of tablets. At the end of the day, like, you're not going to win. They're going to kill you. You know they're going to kill you. You're choosing to die.
Yeah.
So how many suicidal warriors do we, are existing, and is that the battle rage?
Yeah.
For sure. I think it's tapping and that whole kind of goal of whatever circumstance you have, and it's flinging yourself into battle and going, I'm going to take 5 guys down before they fucking have one stitch on me. That's some form of control within a limited sphere of, well, I'm fucked anyway. So interestingly, in the female arc and both Deirdre and Finnever here, we're talking about, once they're basically taking any other action is completely out of their control, other than to take their own life, which is to unrail completely the plans that are set in stone there, and their so-called destiny that is perceived from outside forces. And so by doing something that shifts it completely throws open the dawn, and Maeve has to kind of get over that and find a way around.
Yeah, I mean, I think she doesn't. The point is that she doesn't.
No,
because Finnever that's the thing. Finnever's action was extremely effective in fucking up her mom's plans.
You see, the whole point was Finnever was actually how Maeve kept all the army under control and not killing each other.
Dangling
you can have this if you don't fuck up. And Finnever point of view is like, oh, I love this too, I want whatever, and then got used into killing himself.
And I suppose there's also like looking at, I don't know where you're going to pick up the story or where you're going to end it, but like I don't know, mind always goes to imagine growing up with Maeve as your mother, like that kind of a powerhouse, that strong a woman, and she's remarkable, but like imagine growing up in her shadow, and it must.
She's a lot of things, but she's not a good mum.
She's not even a good person.
She's not a good person, but she's definitely
not really a good king.
No, she's not. She's an absolutely on record terrible parent. Like, she names all her sons the same name because she thinks that they'll be prophesied to kill Crahor. Then it turns out it's a different prophecy about a different King Crahor. Like, it's hilarious, some of the shit that Maeve gets up to. So yeah, like she's a lot of stuff, but yeah, good person, good mother, not on the list. Well, this is actually, she's a little bit woman who is powerful by acting like, masculine, in that sense, that like,
you're one in the Tyranno's case. Well, wait, my tie-in on the battle rage then is another interesting aside. I don't know whether I'll actually explore it or not, but there is quite a high amount of young male suicide in Ireland, and it's like, has that been systemically drawn back down from all the way back when like young men were essentially conditioned to fucking sacrifice themselves in battle to protect everybody else? You see all the Viking stuff and all the rest. I'm going to Valhalla for glory, etc. Where's our, like in Ireland, was death? This is the other thing with the death. Did they just think, we're going to flip over to the other world and have a session now again?
I think
Yeah,
that's,
I mean-
general consensus.
this is an
And-
interesting idea that, like, you know, I've definitely seen it written that, like, warriors in the ancient world, one of the reasons they didn't fear death was because they had such a belief in like reincarnation and coming back and the other world, and like you'd pop over to the other world for a bit and then you'd be back in a little
Yeah.
while, and it'd be
Like you
all
play
the same.
rounds on battlefields, you know, you get shot, wait 5 seconds, back on the
Yeah, that
you
it
know,
was
spawn back in and wait.
and
But it's that-
especially if you died gloriously and people kept talking about you, you would never really leave.
And it's that usefulness thing. It's like being of use to a society. And when a society is broken down in the way that, you know, you could argue today's society has done in many factions and ways, that young men who are taking their own life don't find value in what they are doing and able to provide for others or within the system. And so if we're looking at the transgenerational kind of passing on of a tradition of dying or going to war or basically throwing your life on the line, which was to protect the tribe, to fight and provide money or do something of value. And
Thank you, the
even if
tribe.
their life was, you know, and just using their life in order to at least, you know, do that, send money home to the parents in Ireland, whatever it is, you know, you're providing something and you're being of use in some form. But now without that, there's a massive, unfortunately, still consistent desire to take their lives.
Let's put a suicide hotline number on the show notes of all these episodes, by the way, just because suicidality can be a little bit fucking contagious, and I think we want to make sure that people actually have the resources to reach out if that starts seeming like a good idea, you know.
Yeah, and
God.
it's
Yeah.
never is. And
It's-
like my
it's
dad's,
not.
our father's a psychotherapist who talks adamantly, you know, and frequently out about suicide prevention as well, and ways in which men can get together and actually communicate. So, yeah, I think that's
Yeah, I
probably
think
a good idea. Start
we'll
with
put
that.
some
Yeah.
we'll put some resources on every time we.
So
we
unless your ma has a massive army and is causing a whole load of chaos all around the land, don't go for it. There's probably there's definitely a better option.
Yes.
But
No,
Listen,
but
if you're Finiver,
stop justifying it. Please stop justifying it.
but yeah, I think that's going to be an interesting one to dig into, and I think the
that's my whole
specifics.
story, man.
Yeah, but I think the specifics of that story are really important, and I think the idea of, you know, violence to yourself as a revenge against other people when you've been so kind of objectified and instrumentalized to the way that Finiver is in that story, so that it's like, well, if you're going to treat me as an object, I'm going to break the fucking object, and then you can't do that to me anymore.
It's not violence against herself. That's not the thought process in her head. From my point of view at all, it's not a self-harm thing. It's she knows who she needs to fucking kill to completely fuck up her ma's fucking plans. Yeah. Unfortunately, that person is her, and she is close enough to do it.
Yes.
It's not that she's fucking killing herself. It's that she's assassinating herself to take her ma's fucking army out of it. And that's very important, because I don't want to be promoting fucking suicide, as we were just saying. Sorry.
I think that's a very good distinction. I think that's great, because it's like a planned assassination against the key important person that will unravel this whole thing. Oops, it's me. Well, fuck it.
Yeah. And I think that brings us back to even talking about like the origin of where this, you know, series came from, which is like focusing in on, and our challenge as storytellers for this series is really focusing in, whether it's first person or kind of third person narrator kind of voice, to tell what the character sees, what's in front of them, what's in their periphery only, and to explain their mental process, opposed to the story which they're intertwined in. You know, it's they're very central, and it's a thin line, and we have to cut out a lot of details. And it adds a lot of, you know, when you research these things, you find out a hell of a lot of detail about a character. And oftentimes it's stuff that they mightn't actually have seen or known about. So we have to you find the point of view and the point of action from where they're looking, and tell it from there. So that would be the challenge for all of us.
Narrowing it in, and then I think having it always feels a little bit ballsy to just say, and then the Táin happened, and not say anything else. Do you know what I mean? To be like, to kind of name drop this epic without actually explaining what it is, and just kind of using it as like, well, before the Táin this happened, and during the Táin this happened, and like that will, I think, be like, I think in your one, Oisín, it's going to be a little bit like you are going to have to go into the tactics of Maeve's army a little bit, but I also don't think it's necessarily going to be about, I don't think anybody but Aaron should be talking about the brown bulls and the white bulls, because,
well, here's the thing. If you're telling a story about World War One, you don't call it World War One.
Exactly. Yeah.
You know, you call it the war that's happening now.
Yeah.
Very good point.
That's a good point.
So it wasn't called a Táin until afterwards.
I mean,
it was just
So
a raid.
from Finnever's point of view, she's just in a fucking war.
I think this is a kind of an interesting conversation. This is a little bit of a tangent, but Táin just means cattle raid. So I think when they were in it, they did call it the Táin.
It was a Táin. It was a Táin.
Yeah.
It was
One
it
of
was
many.
It was the Táin that we're on right now.
Yeah.
It's a bit like a war that is called war. Like that's the war. Right?
What's good for them?
While it's happening, you just call it the war. After it happened, it was so huge that people called it the Táin. While it was happening, it was the Táin that's happening now. After it happened, it became capital T, the Táin.
Oh yeah, because of course, like Táins were fucking, you like that was the crack back then.
Yeah.
Let's go on a raid. Murphy's got
cattle raid.
Murphy's got a big fucking fat cow, big fat fucking fleet of cows over there. Let's go whip them.
Táin Bó Murphy. That's it. That's what that would have been called. Táin Bó Fliadas, cattle raid of Fliadas, Táin Bó Culaigne, cattle raid of Cooley. And this is the Táin Bó Culaigne.
And you didn't have any fucking, you couldn't have any boasts then if there was no Táins.
Exactly.
And it's so interesting that have a character in like, again, you Saving Private Ryan, you don't really need to know the context of, you just, it's like there's a thing that from this perspective we're doing it, bombs going off left, right and center. We don't need to know what exactly is the reason that politics behind it, because we're invested in the human story that is trapped in this chaos.
Exactly.
So that's kind of what we're all looking at.
Yeah, treat it as something that is as well known as it is by now. If somebody's been listening to our podcast from the first, and the nice thing about a podcast is that if people haven't, they can go back and listen. And
importantly, as I said, I think, if you take the Táin or the cattle raid or whatever it is as something that is just war, then you know the ins and outs of it. These stories should on their own all stand completely solidly on their own. As we've always said, you don't need to know, you don't need to be an expert to actually get into the emotionality of these stories. You like, the characters are so big and the archetypes are so strong that you'll resonate with something within them if we do our job right.
Yes. So tell us about your story, Aaron.
Which one?
Which one are you doing first?
So I'm a little stuck on Leg. We've decided not to do the main characters because they're too central, because to do any of them, you're just kind of stuck.
You're just going to end up telling the Táin anyway.
Yeah, and I think Leg is a really interesting character because he seems to be Cuchulainn's only friend from early. And Leg is kind of with him from early on when he changes his name. He wants, when Cuchulainn takes up his arms for the very first time, he asks the king to let his friend Leg drive the chariot. King's like, fuck no, I'm not letting two hot-headed youths on the first day taking up arms. So he sends him off with another boring lad who chews the ear off Cuchulainn.
Ibar, the charioteer. Ibar is my favorite character in the Cuchulainn cycle because he's just that field over there is the field with the big house, and thusly gets all the way to the border just shouting on about landmarks. That's how he does it. It's great.
Cuchulainn's just like, oh, what's that? And what's that? Great. Okay, go over there. And he's like, oh shit, where are we? So anyway, I find it interesting because Cuchulainn is, a lot of things, and he's glorified a lot of times as an amazing hero, a transformative character, a character within Irish mythology that is lauded and something to look up to. And oftentimes we pay we go, well, actually, he leads a tragic life. He is often caught saying very misogynistic things against women. He doesn't want to be, he has no time for being is seen as being below a woman. Maybe he's okay with being an equal, but not to be to have one as a superior. And so he's a flawed individual, and he leads a tragic life. And so I think having somebody who trusts him so much so with his own life that he'll hop up on the chariot and wear a light deerskin tunic while driving the fearsome chariot, the war chariot that's studded with knives and spears, and because he won't even wear armor because he trusts the Cuchulainn will protect him. And he's also the only person who's allowed to insult Cuchulainn to bring on the battle rage. And so there's so much in the Cuchulainn story from, I was thinking of even tying in the intoxication of Ulstermen. When Laig is driving the chariot with Cuchulainn going, over there, it's over there, and they drive intoxicated from all the way in Ulster down to Munster. And Laig is like, I should probably stop trusting this guy. Absolutely. Like, when does he have doubts? That's my question for Laig.
Mm-hmm.
At what point does he doubt the leadership of Cuchulainn?
Well, I think there's a really interesting thing in there, which is like, the concept of the halo effect, which is this idea that if somebody's good at one thing, if he's good at one thing, we think they're good at everything. And like, if we do this with like good looking people as well. We think if they're good looking, they must also be good at stuff, or they must also be good. And so I think the halo effect is an interesting one to explore with Cuchulainn, of like, here's this incredibly competent warrior, who's also incredibly impulsive and immature. But like, if you grow up in a warrior culture where being a warrior is the most important thing, and he's incredibly competent at that thing, it would make sense that another young man like Laig would be like, wow, this guy just has it all figured out. And I think the fact that he ends up hanging out with Cuchulainn so much and seeing so much of his less stellar side being kind of a dawning realization of like, he actually doesn't really know what he's doing outside the battlefield, and he gets into things that he has no right to be getting into, and he only gets out of them because he's like supernaturally fucking talented at war, at killing people. But that's not maybe great either. Like, you were going to say something, Mush?
Well, I was going to say something, but I'm going to go, yeah, he's a bit of an archer.
He is a bit of an archer.
But also, the whole point, except that Archer's redeeming quality, is that he actually does care about the people around him.
Woodhouse.
And doesn't want, yeah. Whereas the problem, the big issue I have with Cuchulainn, he cares enough to get coarse sand to pour it in his eyes to teach him better.
It's very sad when Woodhouse dies.
Yeah.
Let's get off Archer.
Anyway.
Yeah. Anyway, my point being is that like Cuchulainn,
Archer podcast now.
Cuchulainn's motivation is always glory. He's just in it for the fucking ego and the story. He doesn't give a fuck about anything except getting his fucking glorious fucking battle story written about him. Whereas Conall Cearnach, for example, is the exemplary fucking lone warrior guarding the border, etc. And had a choice. He didn't have to be. You know what I mean? He could have fucked off, but he's like, no, this is my job. Whereas Cuchulainn's just like constantly insecure and looking for his fucking glory day. And it's not like, oh, I want to protect all the Ulstermen because I'm protecting the Ulstermen. It's because I'm protecting all the Ulstermen because I'll be fucking glorious doing it.
There's an element of that, and I would agree with that. But I also think, and this is what I want to get into with Laig, is how they're brought up, how they're trained. Like,
where does this come from?
Where does this come from? And so, like, it's honor, it's to your word. It's like when Cuchulainn meets Fergus in the Táin there, and he says at the ford, Fergus says, "Okay, you have to run away from me today." And Cuchulainn's response is, "No, you train me yourself. I'll not run away from anybody. Don't make me kill you." So,
but like,
it's the psychopath code. That's how it's how you control the psychopaths.
It's not just the psychopath code, though, because you got to remember that by the time that Laig and Cuchulainn are being brought up, the curse is already in effect. This is a propaganda fear factor thing. Like this is the reason that Crahor MacNessa put so much resources and so much time and so much energy into his warriors and into the reputation of his warriors, is because he absolutely knows that if anybody invades them, they're fucked because they're under a curse and they can't defend themselves. So his whole thing with the Crave Rua, from before Cuchulainn shows up in Owen Macha, is everybody has to be too afraid of Ulster to invade. Everybody has to be so frightened of us that they won't come near us, because if they come near us, we'll crumble. So there's a really interesting little like House of Cards dynamic going on there, where like he's a powerful king. He's got and that's part of why they're so expansionistic as well, right? This is a time when Ulster is pushing out the borders and is pressing on the other provinces. But it is totally, I think this is one of those really cool mythic things where it's like, oh, that's so psychologically true, that like the bravado and the like aggression is absolutely hiding a just completely castrated weakness at its core. They have
like the
nothing. Yeah, like anytime you see that in history, it is always a front for an inner weakness and vulnerability. It is always a front for somebody who's like, I'm fucking shitting myself. And I need you to not know that. And I need you to be more afraid of me than I am of you.
That's exactly it, yeah. If the Irish actually rose up, the whole 9 million of them against the Black and Tans altogether, at anyone's fucked. It was the fact that
it was the British, it was actually a British army. They sent the Black and Tans to terrify them for the army's sake, not the Black and Tans' sake. That was why they had no army left, because they were all fucked.
Yeah.
And then they were like, right, we really have to scare these people now. And it's like, so that's been going on since whenever the Red Branch were around.
Yeah, at least.
So
probably an old tactic then.
Because that's kind of historical, isn't it?
It's around 3,000 years, or the stories are around. I actually don't know. I made that number up just now. I'm realizing.
Answers in the comments below.
Get into
answers in the comments.
Stick with mythic time.
Listen, I'm already terrified that it's already this week all of a sudden, out of nowhere.
Out of nowhere. Well, like the last thing I say on Leg is, I think there's enough material between the stories in and around Cuchulainn and what I've kind of found on Leg and his kind of reputation, that I'll be able to piece together a story to bring him and Cuchulainn up to the border of Ulster, where they see the army approaching, and then leave it. I'm kind of planning on kind of maybe leaving it there, because I think there's enough to surround the story, and I love that idea of the propaganda being big, and the fact that they had to go off to raid and devastate and destroy the surrounding areas, so no one in their right mind would ever launch an attack on them. So I think that'll be a really interesting aspect of that story. Thank you.
That'll be cool. And you'll have, I'm sure he'll have a moment of battle rage at some point.
Yes.
Or at least a moment of being a little bit outside himself. That kind of and with that, then I think do you have it?
I again, in terms of losing control, as Ruth mentioned with Ferdia, where I had placed that battle rage was kind of in the intoxication of Ulsterman. When he's intoxicated, he's locked in a house that's about to burn, and Cuchulainn just jumps out the roof, and he's going, nobody fucking likes him. I'm the only one who sticks around for him. And his fucking arsehole, for the first time, he kind of like breaks, and that halo effect shatters, and he's realized he's just a fucking flawed human for the first time, perhaps.
Yeah, because Cuchulainn's a dick to him in that story. Makes him wait outside the party in the cold till midnight, and then leads him to the wrong part of the country, and then leaves him cook in a fucking house. So I think that's a good one. I think that's a very good one.
I think so, yeah.
I love to look at disillusionment in people's faces when I break the halo effect. It's like, no, I never said I was good at that. I love this shit and stuff.
Amazing. So I'm going to bring it back around to, I think I'm just going to say a little bit about the first story that I'm doing, which is the story of Finn Kim, which is the mother of Conall Cearnach, who has a difficult time having any children, and then has a fairly supernatural child. And I think what was really interesting to me about taking it from her perspective is that she is guarded through all her pregnancy by Ket McMurdoch, who's her brother, who's really, really good to her and really protects her and really minds her. And then as soon as her son is born, and it is prophesied that he will be a great warrior of Ulster, Ket McMurdoch tries to murder him in front of his mother, Ket's sister. And she flies into a rage and gets her warrior brother off her baby, and then raises Conall of the Crooked Neck, who has a crooked neck from the time his uncle stood on his neck. And the two of them, Conall and Ket, are never referred to as uncle and nephew in the way that these kinds of like familial words are often kind of just left out in myths, but they are fucking sworn enemies, and they run into each other again and again and again. They run into each other in MacDahou's Pig, and they run into each other in the final death story of Conall Carnock. And Ket is the warrior who kills Crahor MacNessa. Like, they come up again and again and again, and they are these bitter, bitter, bitter enemies. And in between their relationship is this woman, Finkim, who's sister to one and mother of the other. And I think that's a really interesting character to look into.
In terms of the story, then, Sorcha, she's quite a watcher, so she's observing. Do you think you'll be kind of inhabiting her perspective, or kind of seeing through her eyes?
I think the most interesting point in her story is the day that she gives birth to the child and fights her brother. I think that's to me, that's her story, is the conception and pregnancy. I think that's the most interesting part of her story is there. I'm not really going to get into Conall and Ket and their long bitter rivalry, because I don't think her perspective.
But it's all stated in that anyway, really, isn't it?
Yeah, it's all set up. This is gonna keep happening. It's gonna hurt her every time, in the same way that it does the first time. But yeah, so the reason that we are, just to give everyone the kind of wrap up, the last story that we're going to have in this series, which will come sometime in December or January, depending on how many stories we pick out between now and then. I've got another one or two. So the idea, the perspective that we're going to finish with is the perspective of the Morrigan. And specifically, the Morrigan, we've talked about this before, is not actually the goddess of battle. She's the goddess of battle rage. And there's an old idea that you see in kind of classic mythology, in Greek mythology, like, you don't say you're in love, you say your Aphrodite is in you. Like, there is a way of talking poetically about the gods as they are kind of an energy that comes in and inhabits you. And I really liked that idea for the Morrigan. And to actually go and touch all of these characters through the eyes of the Morrigan. And also to give the Morrigan a bit of voice about her tension with Cuchulainn, because Cuchulainn and the Morrigan have a really interesting dynamic, in that, as you mentioned, Darren, he is not able to deal with women who are superior to him. And I do think, like, a lot of Cuchulainn's character he's very much characterized as an immature person. He's someone who never really fully grows up. And I think that that's very characteristic of kind of immature men, that they have a real kind of mammy issue. Like, they're not okay with powerful women. They get real weird around it, and real domineering and real shitty. And I think that's something that Cuchulainn does quite a lot throughout the story, but he particularly expresses it, and he expresses it repeatedly in his encounters with the goddess Morrigan. He should be her favorite. They should, on paper, be getting along great, because he has this incredible battle rage and he's an incredible warrior. But every time she comes to him, he disrespects her. And I think that's really interesting. I think that's a really interesting dynamic, because I also think that this is a sort of an ego thing. And I think it's something that, like, for me, battle rage, as I'm kind of conceiving of this story, battle rage and ecstasy and sort of flow state all kind of come in together. Like, you know that flow that you get into when you're doing something that you're really, really involved in, and your ego kind of falls away. I think that's a really important part of a creative process. And I also think it's a really important thing to be able to like not try and put your ego back onto, because if you start thinking of it as something that you're doing and that it is very special about you, you tend to fuck it up. And I think if you see it as something that's a little bit like, there's some kind of spirit moving through me right now and I don't really know what it is, but I'm going to let it do what it's doing. I think you're kind of, I don't know. I've always found that a slightly healthier approach to slightly depersonalize those kinds of moments. And I think that's where the kind of God, goddess thing for me becomes quite useful language. And I think that Cuchulainn was never able to do that. I think Cuchulainn thought that the battle rage was his, and the Morrigan thought that his battle rage was hers. And that was what their tension was about. I think that was where their beef came from, was that he was like, no, this is because I'm a brilliant warrior. And she was like, no, this is a gift I'm giving you. And you need to fucking own up to the fact that I'm giving this to you. This isn't you.
And if we're taking the kind of like the leap that Morrigan has kind of is able to almost see through the eyes, or whatever way one can do it, of someone who's losing their shit or going into that flow state, then she has access to kind of that perspective every time. And so we're going to jump in then through all of the characters that we see or touch on to link them all back together.
Yes. And I'm going to have fun with that. That's going to be a fun thing that I'm looking forward to writing once we have all of these moments together. Because I'm thinking of putting it to something a little bit rhythmic, where the beating of your heart is the beating of my wings, and like, that kind of a linking between the different scenes that people will be able to recognize from the stories that they've heard over the last several weeks of like, oh, that's her and that's him and that's the guy and that's your one. Like, I think that'll just be a cool rounding and grounding of the whole series through the Morrigan. So that's the plan.
That's the plan. Do we have a name for this series yet, lads?
I think we were talking about calling it Battle Rage.
Battle Rage.
Battle Rage.
Does that work for a podcast series? Battle Rage? Yeah, sweet. Well, in terms of, just want to make sure.
Yeah, Battle Rage.
The Battle Rage.
The Battle Rage.
Yes.
The Battle Rage.
Do we have, so we have a short list of other characters. We don't have to get into them now because I certainly haven't quite got my head around all of them yet. I am planning on telling Frucht, the swineherd of Munster, or is it Rucht? Fuck, I've forgotten. I've mixed
I don't know.
Again.
I sent you the dictionary entry on that, and it's real brief, but it does tell you which one is which, and I think we've been getting it backwards for years.
Fuck. Okay. One of the swineherds, one of the spirit of the bulls. So I'm going to have to unconfuse whoever's listening to this now as well in my podcast. That'll be a challenge. I have to confuse myself, and that'll be difficult. And kind of go into the mindset of somebody who gets lost in that battle rage for so long they forget themselves completely, for so long that they're born a completely different animal in a completely different time until they eventually remember and kind of die. So I think that'll be that again. I'm planning a fairly rhythmic kind of something that's kind of hypnotic in terms of getting frustrated and getting into it and then getting stuck in it and getting lost in it.
We'll talk about these a little bit more extensively, I think, in the next chat. But does anybody else have another one that they want to throw into the pot? I'm looking at Nessa because I think she's deadly. Rue?
No, I don't. Can I just say quickly that I'm after looking up the Frucht thing, and he's the one who turns into the Brown Bull of Ulster anyway.
Good.
I don't know because does he come from fucking Munster originally?
I think he comes from Connacht originally, and we've always thought that he comes from Munster originally. But when I looked it up in the dictionary the other day, it was the other way around. So, oops.
Okay.
Sorry, everybody, that we told that too wrong. But we kept getting confused, and we're from Cork, so we really wanted him to be from Munster, and I think we just made him be from Munster out of patriotism.
Yeah, whoops.
Take the Cork man out of Cork, but you can't take the Cork out of the man. Something like that. You can actually take the Cork out of all of the men.
Thank God I'm still in Cork at the moment. Just for this moment. Okay, well, look, I'll be looking at that. Thank you for looking it up. So, Rue, did you have another inkling towards another character, or are you going to keep it?
I have to leg it. I'm out of time.
And Oisín is running out of time, so that's good.
No, I think I'm happy to just focus on Ferdy if that's all right.
Yes.
Oisin has gone into Tiernan Og, I think. He's just
Oisin
disappeared.
has pulled a fade. He does do that. He does do that.
He does, yeah.
Well, listen, I think that's good. I think we're up to where we needed to get to anyway. So anything else we want to say?
I was planning on possibly doing Bikru. I'm still not sure. And then your other ones were...
My other one was Nessa, and I'm also looking at, there was a character that I found when I was looking up Finnever, who's called Freyek, who is apparently, Freyek is the person that she was in love with, not Ferdia. They tended to get amalgamated together, but there's a whole load of stories about Freyek and the wooing of Finnever and all of the different quests he goes on to try to win her hand. And then Cuchulainn murders him at the ford without a thought. So
and is this when the she-moans open up?
This, I think, is this character. I think it's the same character. We were talking about Pretty Fairy Man, and I think that is Freyek, but I have to double check that against the Lady Gregory one. So that might be an interesting one to do, because he's just like a whole other story. But it also might be a good one to leave for February, because it's very lovers, and it might be good kind of Valentine-y kind of a one to do. You know, we always like a tragic love story for that. It seems quite involved. So looking at that,
well, look,
not
we
decided.
Definitely have 4 good ones. We probably have 6 anyway, and we'll see what happens after the next few episodes. Stay tuned, and if you want, as I said, to support the podcast and help us out a little bit, you can go to patreon.com/Candlelit Tales. You can also listen to the arguments between the siblings, where Rue and Oisin had to go very quiet because they couldn't get a word in edgeways because we were just fighting.
We were just shouting over each other. I remember
Oisin was taking Circa's side, and I just jumped in to take Aaron's side just for the fucking crack of it and for balance. Like, was saying, all right, if it's going to be war, then let's have war.
let's have a fair war. Let's have somebody in everybody's corner. I remember just having a pen in my mouth for entire stretches of that, where I was like, you need to stop talking for a few minutes, but I still wasn't actually able to calm down enough to listen. So it wasn't very good exercise. It didn't help as much as I thought it did at the time.
I mean, it's our process. We got to fight about stuff and then come around to agreeing.
But yes, that'll be on the Patreon. I believe by the time this goes out, all of our upcoming Samhain dates will be over. But I hope if we saw you enjoyed them, and we said hello, and you had a nice time.
Yes,
maybe we saw you. Hi.
Maybe we saw you. Hi. And from all of us, the Candlelit Tales team, goodbye. For now.
Right. Slán.